All done. All silent. Going. Gone. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Welcome back to Current Market Insights. Peter O'Malley, always a pleasure to have you.
Oh, great to see you, Ciaran.
Peter, look, we chatted a little while ago now about the supply crisis in housing in Sydney in particular. And we talked a little bit about, supply side, demand side. There was a whole bunch of things. But I really want to deep dive today on supply side itself. And I thought we might start, if you don't mind, with a bit of a summary of the supply crisis, what it is, what you think the major drivers are for the current scenario we're in.
Well, it started slowly, and it started with return to office, which for many people meant return to Sydney. Shortly after that, the international borders reopened, which meant a return of international students. And locations around universities such as Randwick, Camperdown, Newtown, Surrey Hills are most acutely impacted by international students being out of the country initially through COVID and then returning en masse to the country. So they absorbed the excess rental stock that existed from COVID, but clearly we have a labour challenge in the country, as many other Western countries do coming out of COVID. And the federal government, both the former Liberal government and the existing Labor government, have said the way to create economic activity and deal with the labour challenges in the economy is to invite lots of people to come and live in Australia. The budget in October 2022 suggested that there'd be about 250,000 overseas migrants come to Australia in this financial year. We're currently tracking at 400,000, Ciaran. So we've invited more people into the country than we do have housing available for them.
And is that, so you think that's the primary driver for the current supply side crisis? I mean, I can't help but think back, decades now of discussion over successive governments not, freeing up enough stock. There's been so many changes to how development's done, how councils operate. There's so many other factors. Immigration being, or forced migration being the primary driver, as you say. What are the other major factors really that play a role in what's happening right now?
Planning's a big one. It's too difficult, and as we know, inflation's rampant in the economy, and the sector of the economy that's bearing the brunt of that is the construction industry. And everybody has heard of a friend who embarked on a $500,000 renovation that turned into $750,000, for example. So cost overruns are normal in that industry, and unfortunately you're seeing construction firms topple with regularity at the moment. So the moment you're having a discussion around supply crisis, you've lost the game there and then, because the way we're structured here in Australia with planning laws and cumbersome processes to get a development up, we're not going to see any meaningful supply coming to market anytime soon that will alleviate this rental crisis. And quite simply, there just was not enough approvals or progress in the construction sector during COVID, and then the rental market, the dwelling market, has been hit with an absolute surge of demand at a time of no new stock.
I find it interesting that we definitely see challenges around those hubs, like you mentioned, around the major universities in Sydney in particular. There is a rental problem, definitely. And, I know within the agency we're at, we've done opens around Surrey Hills, for example, where, one-bed studios with really nothing to offer rent in a heartbeat, literally tens of people trying to get in the door. Do you feel there's any place or any rationale for universities who are actively enticing these foreign students to come into the country for their large fees to have some, responsibility here and try and provide or make provision for these students to house them appropriately?
Oh, look, one of the smartest companies in our economy at the moment is a company called Scape, kicked off here in Sydney, Ciaran, and they build purpose-built accommodation for international students and students around universities, and it's somewhat affordable. And as I say, it's purpose-built in terms of what the rooms offer and and the package put together. So I don't think it's up to universities to ensure that there's adequate accommodation, but the market will always fill the gap if it's allowed to. But what has happened here is that it's not just the international students in isolation that have driven this supply crisis issue that we're dealing with. There are a lot of people, skilled migration, that the government have invited in. So even if universities were doing more on the accommodation front, I don't think that in and of itself would solve the issue. There's not one quick fix here, but clearly we need more supply in the major capital cities, being Sydney, Melbourne, and to a lesser degree Brisbane, but you probably would say Brisbane because they've got the Olympics coming their way. Or we need to stop inviting 400,000 people to Australia each financial year.
Yeah, look, good points, Peter. Absolutely. You mentioned that during COVID, we really had a missed opportunity to work on getting some developments done, and you know, councils had an opportunity really to start providing a little bit more in terms of accommodation for people. I feel like, and this is purely anecdotal, but I feel like every street I drove down in the inner west out to my place in Homebush, there was construction going non-stop. Now, is that an incorrect observation, or?
Renovation construction is different to dwelling construction. I think that's the answer. There's no doubt that homeowners use that period to upgrade their existing dwellings. But what we need here is if we're budgeting for 250,000 people coming into the country in a given financial year, and 2/3 of the way through that financial year, we're out to 400,000 new arrivals. Clearly, we need supply en masse, a lot more than the basic duplex, rebuild that might be happening out in the suburbs at the moment. And not everybody wants Sydney to be a city of absolute high rises either. So it's a big discussion. The government need these new people coming into Australia, new entrants into Australia, to support the economy. But they change the landscape when they get here through no fault of their own.
Yeah, I think that's a really apt point, Peter. You know, I certainly know people who look at places like Zetland and love that greenfields development there and the high-rise, high-density, proximity to the city, the amenity. It's, amazing in so many ways. And then there are so many other people that just think how ghastly to live in a location like this.
Oh, there's the architecture of the actual apartment blocks, but it's the build-up issues that we see. Do we have the public transport available? Do the roads handle it? Are you going to your local coffee shop and there's a 30-minute wait because everything's overpopulated? They're the sorts of issues that you find in global cities, and is that really where we want to take Sydney?
Yeah, absolutely. I know I don't like to wait for my coffee. Look, one of the things that's been proposed as a solution to the supply-side crisis in some capacity is rental caps. And it's been mentioned recently that the federal Greens are looking to, or have suggested, they might hold the federal Labor government as a hostage on this issue if they don't agree to do something. Do you have any thoughts on rental caps as a solution, and any impacts that might have on the market?
Well, look, it's not a solution. It feels good. It makes a politician feel as though they've achieved something if they got up on rental caps. There's clear examples of rental caps in other countries actually pushing the rental market higher. And as we've discussed in previous discussions, Ciaran, new investors are not entering in the property market at the moment. Therefore, the rental supply pool is not expanding, and anything that is fundamentally detrimental to a landlord's interest, such as not being able to maximise true market rate, will just see those investors push into other asset classes. It is not up to the private sector to overcome the blockages that government, and when I say government, that's local, state and federal, have collectively created over a sustained period of time. So the irony here is unbelievable, where government have overseen through being overly bureaucratic and cumbersome in processing and then smashing the economy with excess migration demand, and then they're saying, and the way to fix this is the private sector will subsidise the rental market to help us out. Now, if a rental cap came with some sort of taxation concession from the government for a landlord accepting less than market rent to have a tenant in their property, well, that's a discussion that can be had.
Would that be, I guess, thinking very broadly, would that be a saving overall, in the sense that someone's going to have to pay for those concessions. That's then going to potentially increase the tax burden on people anyway.
What a taxation concession of some sort would do is make the ultimate onus of managing the rental crisis back on the government, because they are the people who, I use government collectively, local, state, federal, they are the people that make approval process difficult for developers and then flood the country with excessive numbers of people. Like a child can see what the end outcome is from there. So why does Ma and Pa, with an investment unit trying to look after themselves for their retirement, why do they have to compensate the government and the marketplace for that poor policy failure?
Yeah, exactly. I did read an interesting take, and obviously not a new take, but an interesting take on this crisis recently that was suggesting that perhaps the way forward here is the government obviously loosen some of the bureaucracy and remove some red tape involved in the planning and development process, but also provide funding and subsidies to the private sector to just move forward with rapid housing solutions, massive supply side delivery. Do you think that that's a feasible option given the current environment that we're in?
Well, where are you going to build this supply? Are you going to build it in inner city Sydney and go up in the sky, or are you going to go out to Orchard Hills where the new airport train line is going to be and build house and land packages there? There's a history of, Melbourne saw this with Docklands, there's a history where you need to build new supply where people want to live, because what you saw down in Docklands for nearly a decade there is they had all these apartments, but for whatever reason, I don't understand the Melbourne landscape as well as the Sydney landscape, but everyone remembers the stories about the Docklands being half occupied because Melbourneites didn't take to it for the first decade.
Oh, absolutely. I know when my wife and I were looking to purchase, we looked down in Melbourne at Docklands and thought, gosh, why is it so cheap? We couldn't understand how, a really nice new apartment in a seemingly great central location could be, a fraction of the cost of something in Sydney.
I agree. They were cheap because nobody wanted them.
Absolutely. I wish we had the opportunity to buy back then. Look, you raise a really interesting point, Peter. I think this is something that comes up in so many sectors in our country. I know it affects the medical workforce massively. This concept that we have an overpopulation for housing issue, and the suggestion really is to increase sprawl and create populated new cities away from the centres. But you're right. How do we support those people with jobs and schools and amenities and all the things that families actually need to thrive in those locations? And I don't know that there is an elegant solution yet.
People coming here to Australia for a better life and being stuck on public transport 90 minutes each way, door to door, work to home. That's not their idea of a better life.
Absolutely. Look, you've mentioned rising rates can have a bit of an impact because it's stopped investors coming to the market at the moment, which is, as you said, there's no expansion of the rental pool right now. Are there any other sort of flow-on effects with the rising interest rates that are impacting supply?
Well, I personally believe the RBA has unintentionally created a negative feedback loop for themselves. And that is that every time they increase interest rates, landlords look to offset those interest rates through higher rents from tenants. And they're not doing that because they're being mean-spirited. They're doing that because their financial well-being relies on that. And then as rents continue to rise, some people do know and some don't, but rents actually form one of the largest components of the CPI basket when the RBA sit down each month to assess what they'll do with interest rates. So the RBA increase interest rates, that increases rents increases inflation, increasing inflation increases interest rates. And that's the negative feedback loop that the RBA are stuck in at the moment. And that's why in late April, they chastised the federal government on this supply issue. So it's a big issue.
Absolutely. You've mentioned in the past the impact of land tax as a component for investors when they're looking at purchasing a property. And I know we touched on it when we were looking at yields a little while ago now as one of those things that needs to be considered. Now, we've seen that there's some increases coming. Land tax obviously is going up all the time. Do you think that that's contributing to the supply side crisis or potentially the rental pool?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And I don't pretend to know how to set a government budget. So whilst I can identify the challenge or the problem, I don't come armed with the solution. But the reality is that land tax in New South Wales and where land values have gone in New South Wales have meant that many landlords have been forced to sell down their holdings to reduce their land tax bill. And when that property sells, invariably it sells to an owner-occupier because replacement investors are not coming into the marketplace. So what type of landlords or investors would enter a property market when interest rates are high? They are the more wealthy end of the market, if you like. But that end of the market is chasing other asset classes because, if I can throw in negative gearing here as well, some people won't like the suggestion that any rent cap should come with a subsidy or tax relief for the landlord. They'll instantly say, well, what about negative gearing and all the negative gearing that landlords get? Not every landlord is negatively geared. The really wealthy people in the property market are positively geared. That's the first point. Yeah. The second point is that a property investor pays council rates every quarter to the local council, pays land tax and stamp duty to the state government, stamp duty when they purchase and land tax throughout the course of their ownership. And then when they eventually sell the property, they pay capital gains tax to the federal government on the profits that they've made. So a property investor who's positively geared is actually paying all three levels of government money right through the ownership of that property. And government's now up in arms saying, even though we take 40% of your annual rental intake in land tax, we don't understand why you don't want to buy more investment properties and help us out with the rental market.
Yeah, what a shock. It almost seems to me, Peter, like government absolutely love handballing the blame onto private landlords and demonising them in the public eye because it's so much easier to deflect and say, well, look, these guys are the bad guys and you should blame them for your rent going up and there not being enough houses for you to move into. And
the reality is there's just incoherency between the three levels of government on this point. And it's now brought us to a situation where there's 400,000 people coming into the country each financial year, and we simply don't have anywhere for them to sleep.
Do you think that, a bit of a loaded question potentially, do you think there's any possibility now that we almost have, or we've got, singular Labor governments across the country, that we might see some, support across different levels of government to get some change through?
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. No, fair. Look, you've mentioned, as a bit of a final question, Peter, you've mentioned that, you think immigration and the numbers of people coming in well beyond estimates is a major issue. If you had to make one single policy choice right now that would have the greatest short-term impact, do you think that would be the one?
If I had to make one policy change at the moment, I would give more planning power to the state government over local councils. I know that the previous Liberal state government took a lot of power away from local councils, but I would take over planning in a bigger way to push supply through. Now, if that doesn't work for the electorate and they can't handle that, the only other solution is to stop the 400,000 people coming into the country each financial year. There's an argument to say you can come to Australia but you can't come to Sydney or Melbourne. I guess that's another solution on the run. But yes, you basically have to stop the surging demand of people moving here from overseas, or you have to rapidly push supply to the market, and I don't believe that local councils are the best people to do that.
Certainly lots to ponder after this week's chat, Peter. Look, thank you for coming in and for that great recap on what is happening on the supply side. I know that there's still lots to come, and I'm sure plenty of people out there are nervous about what's happening.
Indeed. Thanks, Ciaran.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks for joining us on the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate, the podcast providing real estate insights you won't find anywhere else.